Well, to pull a not particularly spectacular quote from my favorite underappreciated Denzel Washington movie, everything is motive. So, we've reached that point in the month where it is time once again for me to talk about LGBTQ plus representation in the media, which does mean, first of all, we are going to swap the lookout. And this is my chance to let anyone know who might be tuning in for the first time that I don't just talk about this stuff idly. I do have a stake in it. I am gender fluid. My own personal sense of my gender and my identity around that, it doesn't stay put. It tends to shift around a bit. Now, depending on how you choose to think about it, that usually puts me either in with the Q or the T in LGBTQ plus. So, with that established, and with almost enough time to get both of these earrings in while I did it, oh, I was so close. Thought I wouldn't have to stall for time. There we are. Let's get started. Before we get too far along, I do want to mention this is in fact a sponsored video. And before you click off from that, it's not anything that you would have to pay for. You can enjoy it for free. This video is being sponsored by Radio versus the Martians, a podcast dedicated to any and every possible geeky subject, from the cinematic oeuvre of Arnold Schwarzenegger to whether or not people need to pull over for the Ghostbusters, to the nature of vigilante fiction, to the best and worst Batman, Star Trek, Star Wars. It's all over the place. The hosts, Mike Gillis and Casey Dorn, tend to think of it as the McLaughlin Group for nerds. Give it a listen. Radio versus the Martians. You can find them all over the place. Whatever you use to listen to podcasts, I can speak, they will be on there. So they are sponsoring this video. My thanks to them. It's a great podcast. Give it a listen. All right. So this time we are going to talk about one of those things, those arguments that I come across that just never fails to frustrate me, and I really just need to pick at this thing. This is something I do from time to time, and not only about just this kind of content, because as an active curator of my comment section, there will sometimes be an argument or a line of thinking that I see used repeatedly enough that I feel the need to just try and address it in video so that I don't have to keep replying to comments and just say the same thing over and over and over again. I get to make a video, sort of cleanse myself of the idea, and move on. I mean, that's why I have videos on things like the history of political messaging in Doctor Who, or the concept of think of the children when it comes to LGBTQ plus visibility and entertainment. So this time around, I want to address the concern that I often see brought up about the motivations behind things like diverse casts or minority representation in movies, TV, comics, etc. So, to start with an instance from Doctor Who, which will probably never stop being my go-to reference point, a good example of what I'm talking about comes up rather frequently when discussing the lead cast of the current iteration of the show. Namely, I'm talking about the fact that the Doctor is now a woman, and 2 out of the 3 companions are people of color. It's almost inevitable when conversations about those facts end up happening, someone will eventually say some version of, it's not that I care about diversity casting, but they're only doing it to meet a quota. Or, I wouldn't mind a female doctor if it wasn't being done to push an agenda. So, it's basically people saying that the problem with these and many other instances of increased diversity is that it's being done for the wrong reasons. Speaking personally, this is fairly infuriating to see brought up as much as it is, because Intentionally or not, it derails and prevents any conversation about the actual quality or merit of any given instance of representation. You see, when the conversation gets stalled on what the motivations of the creators were and whether or not those motivations are the right ones, that means we never actually get to talk about the representation itself. It's like when Congress, when a bill gets stalled in committee, they never actually vote on the thing because they are too busy arguing over what and why the thing even is. It's a pretty simple but irritatingly effective tactic for avoiding actually talking about diversity itself. And this, like most arguments, can be done in good faith, where the person who brings it up has genuine concerns for this aspect, or it can be done in bad faith, where intentionally derailing the conversation was the intent from the very beginning. And as is generally the case with online discourse, it's almost impossible to be sure which of those you're dealing with in any given instance. But the end result is no less frustrating, regardless of the motives of the speaker, which is my way of foreshadowing where I'm going with all this. Because the thing is, for one, I'm far more interested in the actual outcome of something than I am in the reasons that those involved had for doing it in the first place. I think most of us tend to agree that horrible things can be done for the right reasons, or at the very least for reasons sincerely believed to be right by the people doing them. There's a reason everybody knows the phrase, "the road to hell is paved with good intentions." But that doesn't seem to be as universally accepted the flip of that, which is that having impure motives doesn't negate a positive outcome. At its most simplistic, just think about how rich people engaging in charity causes, they get tax benefits for that. That means that some wealthy people, their primary, if not their exclusive motivation for supporting charities at all is for selfish, personally beneficial reasons. The wrong reasons. I think most would agree. But that money is still going to be used by a charity to do good things, regardless of why it was donated in the first place. Heck, you don't even have to be rich for this kind of thing to apply. I mean, look at local level charity drives that have prizes or raffles. There are people who are participating because they want the prize. And they really couldn't care less about the charity at any other time. It doesn't matter, though, because it still puts money towards the cause. The money given by the selfish is just as helpful as the money given by the altruistic. Because, I mean, let's not kid ourselves about this. Most people just don't give money to their local school, but they'll buy a cookie at a bake sale that benefits that same school, because they want a cookie. There was actually a really great example of this that came up in the news while I was working on the script for this video, which by the time it comes out will be, have been a few weeks prior to when you're seeing this. So now the Trump administration launched a global campaign to combat the criminalization of homosexuality across the globe, and that is a good thing. Now, the not-so-secret reason for doing this is to put additional pressure specifically on the country of Iran because of that nation's human rights record in this area. So I'll be very surprised if that pressure gets applied in the same degree or at all in countries like Saudi Arabia or Russia or ones we have better relationships with. So doing this whole thing in order to target a country we don't like is not exactly a motivation I'm in love with. But there's still a great amount of good that could potentially come out of this, regardless of who started it or why. I could keep listing examples, but I hope folks get my point on just sort of the general premise that good results can happen regardless of initial motives. So now, applying this principle to representation in media, if we agree that increased diversity is valuable, or at the very least, not an inherent negative in and of itself, feel free to check out the last month's video as to why representation matters in the first place, if you actually do need convincing on that point, and then come on back. What this should mean is that why it's happening should be a minimal part of the conversation at best. To be clear, I'm not saying or even implying that every instance of representation gets some kind of automatic pass and a thumbs up. But let's at least deal with the merits of the actual representation we're given, rather than never addressing that, because we're debating the reason why we have it in the first place. Of course, that's the logical argument. And I say almost every video that I do on this topic that you can't just logic people out of some of these positions or out of a feeling. Opinions are emotional, and there's an emotional element to this argument, because it circles back to another video I did a few months ago, link up there, talking about the emphasis on agendas in the current discourse. I don't support these agendas, therefore I can't support anything created that comes about as a result of those agendas. Supposed agendas evoke very emotional responses, which make it very easy to disregard whether or not the end result has a positive effect. But more than that, it can quickly fall into the realm of conspiracy theory, because it's actually pretty infrequent for a writer, director, company, whoever, to actually say in plain words what their agenda even is. So these supposed organized agendas, the ones that some people argue negate the value of representation and diversity, more often than not are really just cobbled together speculation, which then gets touted as fact. I used to mark comments that made wild claims about the intention or thoughts of a creator by replying with "citation needed." I still do that sometimes, but I don't do it nearly as much as I used to, because I got really tired of getting back a list of only tangentially related items, often buried under somebody's think piece rather than being given a primary source, and then just being shouted at to connect the dots. You know, the funny thing about connecting dots is people will draw some insanely bizarre lines in order to connect some of these things, because a lot of this isn't logical. And even most of the instances that I see that get pointed to as evidences of companies laying out their agendas aren't actually that, at least not from where I sit. So let's take Marvel's initiative, which pushed a large number of new female characters, as well as having female or non-white characters take up the mantle of previously white male heroes. This is a juicy one. Now, Marvel did this with Wolverine, Iron Man, Hulk, and Thor, while pumping up the importance of characters like Captain Marvel and Falcon. And they were pretty upfront about the fact that they were doing this, which of course means it got the agenda label slapped on it pretty quickly. But the thing is, even something like this isn't actually about pushing an agenda, not a politically minded one at any rate, because it's not about ideology. It's about making money. Marvel did it because at the time they believed it to be a sound business strategy. Whether or not it worked out that way isn't the point. The point is they never would have done this if they thought it would cause them to lose money. Making some kind of political statement would not be considered worth the loss or the damage to the IP. This is also the reason that they eventually reversed a fair number of these changes, because they did what comics always do. They threw a bunch of stuff at the wall, they kept what sticks, and they reset the rest back to what it used to be. It's not politics. It's business. When talking corporations, the only agenda is money. Any political stance they appear to take will always have the underlying motivation of making the company more money. The reason the entertainment landscape has long been oversaturated with cis, white, heterosexual male characters happened not by design or sinister machination or agenda, but by a combination of those traits being the most common among the people who were making the entertainment in the first place, write what you know, and all that, as well as the presumption that those people, that demographic, were the ones with the most disposable income, so it makes the most sense to appeal to them most of the time. Sure, go for the niche market of women, people of color, every now and then. But the big money, for a very long time, throughout our history, what has traditionally been in the hands of cis, white, hetero guys. So the overrepresentation of that group didn't happen because of agenda. It happened because of capitalism. And the correction of representation also isn't being done because of an agenda. It's being done because of capitalism. And I am not trying to make this a capitalism is bad video. I'm just being honest about what these motivations are for these moves that these companies make. Now, there are those who would actually say that the desire to make money is an instantaneous taint on increased diversity, but that just kind of circles back to my original point. If you believe, as I do, that representation matters and is important, then you pretty much have to get over the fact that most of the time it happens, or at least gets the green light to go ahead, because somebody thinks it's going to make them money. That's especially true when we talk mainstream representation. This actually came up on the Council of Geeks Discord a little while back. Yes, I get the question sometimes. It does exist, but it's a Patreon perk. So if you want in, just head over to the Patreon. Yes, I can be shameless, and indeed am a capitalist myself after a fashion. So on the Discord, the topic of discussion that came up was Disney hosting an actual official Pride event at some of its resorts, but charging pretty high prices to attend or participate. This bothered some folks, and I do get why. I mean, a company going, we're on your side, give us cash, doesn't exactly fill you with the best feeling in the world. They're superficially supporting you while still treating you as nothing more than a potential consumer. Except that's how companies view everybody, through the lens of their value as a consumer. So for me, the silver lining in things like the Disney Park Pride event is that an increasing number of companies believe it is better business for them to openly support diversity, sometimes at the risk of alienating consumers who are against it. That means that they believe that Team LGBTQ plus ally is the financially sound team to be on. And regardless of how cynical that reasoning may be, it doesn't remove the value of the representation that results from that. And honestly, I take these kinds of moves as positive indicators in and of themselves. The people whose job it is to read the culture and figure out the broadest and most lucrative appeal for their products think that diversity, representation, and inclusion are going to win. And let's not kid ourselves, truly pure motives are such a rare thing in this world, so to demand them of representation and entertainment very quickly morphs into an argument to not even bother having representation at all, because you can argue in pure intent almost every single time. So you won't see me making that argument, and I can't help but be frustrated when I see other people making it. It would be amazing if these companies and artists and writers were standing by me out of nothing more than the kindness of their hearts. But even if that's not the reason, them being there still has value. The representation still has value, even if it's for the quote-unquote wrong reasons. And so we'll wrap it up there. As I said, this is yet another instance of me seeing repeatedly an argument that I don't want to hear anymore. And that's not me saying, like, if I see you making it, I'll delete your comment. No, I won't. You make your comments respectfully, I'll leave them up, but also don't be surprised if I just reply with a link to this video. Because it's a heck of a lot easier than trying to type all this out in a comment reply. So, the reasons for increased diversity and visibility. How much do they matter? My feeling is not very much. Do you agree? Do you feel differently? Whatever your thoughts are, even if you disagree with me, drop something down in the comments and let's talk about it. Respectfully is all that I ask. A whole bunch of stuff to do down there as well. There's buttons, there's links, there's the link to Radio versus the Martians, the Patreon, my P.O. Box. Check them all out, or don't. That's okay too, because at the end of the day, you're the council, I just run the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.